There is something truly different about the first rerun in a gacha game. When a new unit releases, it is easy to guess what the question in the community will be. How strong are they? However, things change when they're having a rerun, as by now, you already know what they are capable of and their overall strength. You know that they aged poorly or that they've aged quite well. And for the most important part, you have other options to choose from. And in this case, that other choice is Zankou. This is what makes this rerun so interesting, as Nanally is not just another character coming back, she is also the very first DPS we ever got, returning alongside the first limited incantation DPS we have ever received. Zankou also seeming to look like a DPS that wants us to look at DPS units somewhat differently. So if you are looking at these two banners and are wondering who you should actually pull, I don't think that answering it is as simple as looking at tier list placements, as right now the two represent different kinds of investments. Nanally right now represents certainty, while Zankou represents potential. When you put certainty and potential together, the better question then becomes, what does my account actually need right now? And that is the question I plan to answer with this video. As if you are a launch player and already have Nanally, then you aren't really bound by how strong Nanally is. You are actually trying to decide if Zankou presents something to your account that you don't already own. And if you don't own Nanally, then your decision becomes even more difficult. Do you jump for the unit that has been around longer and has established themselves as a strong Blossom DPS, or the one that gets potentially more valuable as NTE releases more characters? Cough cough, Linko. Let's get one thing out of the way first. Nanally is strong. We are not going to pretend she hasn't been getting better every update simply because a new shiny unit is in front of us. She has multiple established Blossom teams with different substitutes for the teams with varying levels of power for each team. That's something Zankou simply cannot offer yet. She is a more complicated proposition, as she too proposes having different teams and playstyles that potentially could work with multiple of the archetypes we have in the game already. I will be covering her teams in an upcoming video, but she can spread damage over time stacks, she has follow-up attacks which will only improve with Linko, she has break capabilities that are also quite strong. If you've noticed, the things to consider with Zankou are more than just the damage she's doing with what she has right now. It's as if she's saying, give me the right teammates and I'll not only turn what they're doing into something stronger, but I'll perform better as well too. That to me sounds fantastic, but there's always an important caveat with such things. Zankou has potential to be tied to the ecosystem around her, though she has enough breathing room in the way of teams for that not to matter as much. Nanally, on the other hand, she doesn't have the uncertainty of potentially getting super strong with future units. Her ecosystem is already complete, and that to me is the first major aspect of this comparison. Nanally gives you a team and Zankou gives you a direction. But that's where this comparison gets interesting, because if Nanally already gives you a complete team, why would you ever choose Zankou? Conversely, if Zankou could potentially be the main unit of a new archetype and at the same time making break and damage over time stronger, why would you want to look backwards to the game's first DPS? The answer has very little to do with personal strength, but weighs on what your account already owns and how certain getting a future unit is. Certainty is something that gets overlooked when a rerun happens. It is common for people to treat an older character as if they have automatically become weaker simply because a new unit has been introduced. This would be worse if they were the same element, but for this rerun, they aren't competing necessarily on raw power. So the preposition then becomes value. With that being the lens, Nanally gets quite the huge advantage, as you already know what you're buying into. Pulling Nanally is not like a theory crafting investment. You are not hoping for future characters that fix her or make her stronger. You're not hoping a new character introduces a new feature to her reaction that improves her power. You already know what the character does. That's extremely advantageous in a game where your currency is so important. If you've played gacha games enough, you should know the feeling of investing in a character's future potential only to be disappointed when that actually happens. It is painful as there are no refunds, and Zankou has that exact uncertainty built into her right now. And no, this does not mean she is weak. Quite the opposite, actually. My early impressions on her are one of a unit that is actually quite strong. However, as of right now, she isn't operating in isolation. The quality of her team might matter enormously. That means for now, when you're pulling Zankou, you should probably consider whether you'll be able to get her team and how strong her teammates might actually be in the future. So, it's Zankou plus your current account standing. The same can be said about Nanally. However, two of her best teammates are G1 and Zero, which are borderline free with the selectors we have received. Then Eroy is still attainable with the current banner. Seems like a simple team to get together, really. Now, before this starts sounding like a Nanally rerun advertisement, we have to consider the other side of all of this as well. As besides just considering whether Zankou will do more damage with the release of new units, there is also the potential that her value increases and scales as the roster around her improves. We cannot simply paint this as a weakness, as it's a different way of looking at the whole her future teammates are still missing thing. Besides having follow-up attacks linked with an upcoming unit, her kit appears to turn damage over time effects into something that can be spread and enhanced. Her Nightmare Waltz mechanic taking damage over time effects that already exist on one unit and spreading them to other units is good potential. While this might not sound so good from a boss content perspective, it has potential to be quite strong in AoE content and situations. Assuming we ever get a pure AoE mob mode, this would be more than just extra damage, but turn into the main source of damage. So I do not think it is fair to assess Zankou as just another DPS running alongside Nanally. She's potentially more interesting than that. She is a DPS that could get more interesting. She has a ceiling that could potentially be affected by those that come after her. This to me is a huge distinction. A traditional DPS will one day run into a painful problem. A new DPS comes and they have higher multipliers, or their reaction passive is just better and they clear endgame faster. Suddenly, your old DPS unit isn't the character you want to use on field anymore. Zankou's design potentially gives her another role. If, and this is a big if, a future character applies stronger or faster or even off-field damage over time stacks, Zankou might not compete with that character at all. She could actually use them. Note, I have not even considered the future character being Linko, with the potential follow-up attacks buffing. The existing theory crafting around her points to this possibility. Zankou could potentially be a driver for damage over time teams, as opposed to being thrown out at the sight of a stronger damage over time applier. For me, this is when the comparison stops being about old versus the new and becomes about certainty versus potential. And this is the part I really want you to keep in mind before we start talking about the actual teams they use. It would be easy to look at Zankou's kit and say, she's future-proof. Or you could look at Nanally and say, she's already proven. And both those statements can be true at the same time. The real question is which of these matters the most for your account. One of the easiest ways to understand Nanally's value is to stop looking at her as an individual DPS. This time, you won't be pulling for just Nanally. You are committing to the package she comes as a part of. The package is a well-wrapped package that has already been tested, it has already been optimized, and is currently understood by the player base at large. We all know its strengths and weaknesses, the rotation and all. This to me matters enormously for when you decide to spend gacha currency, especially as a free-to-play player. The psychological difference in pulling means everything. You know that this character is good, as well as knowing exactly what the character will do for your account. Sadly, this is not something Zankou can replicate before her release. Zankou can have this mouth-watering kit on paper, having amazing interactions with Scorch and damage over time, potential with follow-up attacks. However, until we put everything together through testing, the uncertainty will still be there. And that uncertainty is not something that will clear up with just a few days. So this is particularly important for someone who is looking to pull a character with established strength immediately at launch. This is why I don't think you will be doing yourself justice if you're purely looking from a perspective of who is stronger right now. Zankou does not have to invalidate Nanally to be worth pulling. Nanally can be as strong as she is, while Zankou can create an entirely new reason to pull for her and spend your hard-earned amulet. But what if you already own Nanally? This actually flips the entire question on its head. As if you already own Nanally, this becomes more of an "is Zankou actually worth it" type of question. As many players will have already pulled for Nanally, they have built her, have a strong team with her that doesn't struggle at all to clear the content in the game. Zankou appearing for you is a different question altogether. This for me is where the answer becomes less obvious, probably because I'm also in the same situation. As you don't always need a new DPS simply because a new one releases. If say you have Nanally for Team 1 and Lacrimosa for Team 2, then you might need more convincing to pull for any new DPS that shows its head in the game. Thankfully, that's what makes Zankou such an interesting character. Her design gives more value than just occupying a DPS slot, as owning Lacrimosa, for an example, might not be the competition for her that you expect, as does having Nanally. It doesn't invalidate the value she can add for your account. The real question for me isn't whether Zankou can replace Nanally. It is whether Zankou can give my roster access to something other DPS currently cannot. And that answer may just be a yes, as Zankou isn't just another DPS. That for me alone makes the comparison sort of unfair to your traditional DPS character, as the mechanic that interests me the most is her interaction with damage over time units. Nightmare Wall's spreading effect has so much potential in my head, potential that might not ever be realized, but what if it does? As I said in my previous video, Zankou asks who can make my effects work the best, as opposed to who can buff me the most. For now, the answer is still only Lacrimosa, who can apply damage over time stacks fast enough for her to jump in and spread and enhance them. Lacrimosa is probably one of the most interesting units to bring into this conversation, as depending on who you ask, you might get different answers. I am not pulling Zankou because I have Lacrimosa and she is incredibly strong, some might tell you. Others might say, I am pulling Zankou as I want to put her into my Lacrimosa team and have them deal a lot of damage. Zankou will work well with a unit like Lacrimosa. However, for many, relegating a unit as strong as Lacrimosa to a damage over time applicator and having a new DPS who might not even be stronger than her is a tough story to sell. And you know what? Finding that difficult to do actually makes sense. However, the potential to make the Lacrimosa team even stronger is also there. Zankou potentially changes the question from who is the strongest character I own to who can contribute the most to Zankou without getting in her way. And this is where I think the entire Nanally versus Zankou debate finally comes together. Because the winner of this banner isn't necessarily the character who clears a stage 3 seconds faster. It's the character who gives you something you don't already have. If you want to know my final recommendation, if you're sitting there with your hard-earned amulets, here's how I would approach this. If you don't own a reliable DPS character already, say you are new to the game and have only pulled Eroi or have not even pulled Eroi, Nanally is honestly the safer choice. However, if you already own Nanally or already set with a team that demands 0, like Shinku, I would then start considering Zankou. As you don't pull Zankou right now purely for strength, but because you want to expand your roster, or perhaps you want to bet on the follow-up gameplay taking her to heights that are currently unseen in the game, her future value is what should compel you. As you aren't necessarily buying into Zankou, you're buying into what you can do with the characters you already own and can get in the future. Nanally is safer, Zankou is more speculative. Pull for Nanally if you want certainty. Pull for Zankou if you want the potential. And if there's one thing to remember from this entire video, it's this. Don't ask which character is stronger. Ask which character makes your account better and stronger. I believe that's how you should look at every rerun that might come going forward. Well, that's it from me. Until the next time, I will see you in theyre.